Well, once again, thank you so much for joining us today. Our Owatonna Rotary Club does meet here every Monday at noon. If you'd ever like to visit again, we'd love to see you again. My name is Ryan Gillespie, and I am the president of the Owatonna Rotary Club this year. Again, we welcome you all. We're going to dive right in. We're so excited to have this forum here today, and I will welcome Brad Miner with our Owatonna Chamber of Commerce.
Well, terrific. What a great way to kick off our candidate forum season here in October, and we're just really thrilled to have this congressional forum here today. It's been, it was since 2006 was the last time we hosted a congressional forum here in Owatonna, and so we're thrilled to have that opportunity today, and you can tell this community wants it because we're here in a full room, so great to have you here. I wanted to mention before we get into kind of how this is going to work today that we have a variety of media here today, so you'll have the opportunity, or folks you know who weren't able to make it here today, to listen to it on KRFO 1390 at 6 p.m. This evening. It'll be on OwatonnaLive.com as well as our public access station here. The Owatonna People's Press will have coverage, of course. And then we have other various media from around the region here as well. And so we welcome you all to us here today. We're also live streaming on Owatonna Chamber Facebook page as well today. Like I mentioned, this District 1 race is being watched nationally, and we're thrilled to be able to hear from our candidates here today. We have several prepared questions, and we want to thank our Chamber Policy Committee for working on those. And then we will accept questions from the audience, and you've got, I realize it's fairly small, but you've got small green sheets of paper. We do have some in the back. Hopefully we can circle around. Write your question. We'll come around and collect those. We will do our best to get to as many of those as we can, or we'll combine if we get a bunch that are very similar and ask them that way. So with that, I'd like to invite our candidates to come forward and take their place at the stage here. Mr. Jim Hagedorn and Mr. Dan FEEHAN. Welcome. And with that, I'd like to introduce our moderator, Mr. Jeffrey Jackson, editor of the Owatonna People's Press. Jeffrey.
I think you gave louder applause to the candidates than you did to me. But that's okay. And it is nice to see all the media here today, and I'm glad you're on that side because this is my better side. Gentlemen, welcome. Now for the format of the forum. No question has been provided to the candidates in advance. Candidates, you will be given 2 minutes for opening comments. Then, when the questions are asked, we will alternate responses to each question, and you will be allowed 1 minute and 30 seconds for each question. Sharon West is our timekeeper today. Sharon, raise your hand so they can see you. That's Sharon. When you have 30 seconds left, she will hold up a yellow card to indicate you have 30 seconds left. When your time is up, she will hold up a red card indicating your time is up, and I will cut you off, so be prepared. So, to begin with, going in alphabetical order, I suppose, Mr. FEEHAN, we will start with you today for your opening statement. You have 2 minutes, sir.
Hey, thank you so much. Thank you to the Chamber, thank you to the Rotarians for letting us co-opt your meeting here today. I'm honored to be here. My uncle's former president of the Red Wing Rotary Club, so he reminded me today to be on my best behavior. It's wonderful to be with you today. Again, my name is Dan FEEHAN, live in North Mankato, grew up in Red Wing. And a very simple reason that I am running for Congress to represent Southern Minnesota is because I believe our politics has to be public service. I was inspired to join public service when I was a kid growing up, watching my own father. And that led to joining the military after witnessing 9/11, serving 2 combat tours in Iraq, searching for roadside bombs, trying to capture insurgents. But it also led me to the classroom, a middle school classroom, which in many ways was a much tougher challenge than leading soldiers. But I learned 2 really important lessons. Any leader has to be able to work with everyone that's in their charge. They have to be able to work with others because the stakes are huge. The stakes for a soldier, for a teacher, the stakes for a representative in Congress are enormous. And I'm also running because I had an experience working with Congress. I was an acting assistant secretary of defense, and it was deeply frustrating. While I was trying to manage a budget of over $600 million, I had to work with a Congress that was hell-bent on arguing with each other and going home, on not getting anything done. Look, I believe in the spirit of free enterprise, but I don't believe enterprise is free when our challenges are as enormous as they are. Challenges in healthcare, affordable housing, workforce development, and on and on. Those challenges are there and they're real, and it depends on leadership that's able to work with everyone to get them done. And I'll leave you with this, my own philosophy of leadership. Either a leader knows what they're talking about, or they know who to turn to when they don't. There's not a third option. You can't make it up as you go along. And so I'm committed to you, to working with the community of Owatonna and beyond in the 1st District to be able to represent everyone in Congress. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to be with you today. Thanks to the Rotary and all the folks that are here. I really appreciate it. You might remember I'm the guy last time that almost beat Tim Walz. We had 49.6% of the vote. We kept going. And my background is this. I'm a product of this district. Born in Blue Earth, Minnesota, where I live today. I grew up on a grain and livestock farm just outside of Truman. My father, grandfather, and great-grandfather, all southern Minnesota farmers. One of the great experiences in my life was when my father was elected to Congress to serve this area in Minnesota from 1974 to 1982. I bring that up for a specific reason. The fellow that beat him in '82 is in the audience, and Congressman Penny, it's a pleasure to see you today. And I always tell people, if you can't say anything bad about the guy that beat your dad, he must be a pretty good guy. So there you go. The reason that this race is so important, it's on the national map, is because it's really a miniature national election. This country faces a clear choice. We're either going to move back to the Obama policies and then some, far to the left, because the Democrat Party has become the National Democrat Socialist Party. They've really moved far to the left. Or we're going to keep moving in this, what I'd say is the right direction. If the Democrats take control of the House, people like Dan win, there's going to be resistance, there's going to be impeachment. They're going to take us to radical policies like gun control, socialized medicine, and open borders. I'm running for Congress to be a conservative reinforcement in the U.S. House, to partner with President Trump to keep moving our country in the right direction, to keep America safe and secure with a strong military and secure borders, to get the economy moving in the right direction, make us prosperous, not by transforming America into some socialist state, but by reforming the government, to protect our God-given rights, the right to life, the right to keep and bear arms, and the right to religious freedom, and finally to sustain agriculture and our rural way of life. We have a clear choice in this election, and it's a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to discussing the issues.
Thank you. Now, at this point, I would ask the audience from here on out to allow them to make their replies to the questions without any applause. We will hold all applause until the very end after their closing statements, if we will. Mr. Hagedorn, we will start with you. The current political climate is, as some have characterized it, volatile, polarized, fragmented, and tense. One of you two will win this election and will go to Washington, where you will have to deal with those problems of a deeply divided nation on a day-to-day basis. How will you deal with that volatility, that polarization, that fragmentation, and that tenseness when you get to Washington? And as part of your answer, can you help set the tone for this forum and demonstrate how you can reach across the aisle by saying something nice about your opponent?
Yes, thank you. We'll just get that out of the way, Dan. We respect and admire your service in the military. We honor it. We appreciate everything you've done and all of our veterans. And I think we can give all of our veterans and Dan a round of applause. You know, the House of Representatives is an institution put together by the forefathers to be controlled by one vote more than half. And in this case, this actually could be the election that decides which direction we move in the country. The House's job is to have the majority get the bills through, send them to the Senate, where there's a lot of negotiations and so forth, and then you have compromises with conference committees. And so I think there is polarization, there's no doubt, because there's two worldviews at odds here. You know, the worldview of the left is more government control, socialism, those types of things. The worldview on the right is more individual opportunity, freedom, liberty, I would believe. That's what I would argue, big difference. When I had a job in Washington as well, working with the Congress. I was an official with a Treasury agency. I was a Congressional Relations Officer. My claim to fame was that we took a bill that actually, and got it through the Congress, that downsized my own agency, closed check writing centers, eliminated 5% of our bureaucrat workforce, saved the taxpayers over $2 billion. And I worked with both Republicans and Democrats on that. I have no problems working with my Democrat friends if they have a good idea or they want to support me in my ideas.
Thank you, Mr. Hagedorn. Mr. FEEHAN, same question.
Great, thank you. And to begin the compliment, right back to you, sir. Thank you for your service to our country as well. There's a lot of moving pieces that make America an incredible nation, and your own services are part of it as well. So thank you, Jim. Look, this is a polarized time. It is a polarized time that makes me want to step forward, because it's in chaotic times like these that you need people to step forward and try to be a voice of reason, a voice of civility. That's the feeling I had on 9/11. That's why I joined the military in the first place. But it's also the feeling of what's in our country right now, where you can't get beyond your Facebook feed without seeing neighbors fight against each other. And it's in that climate that you need people to step forward. And that's why I'm doing this. I was just talking with the mayor before we started today. We had an incredible storm come through here last week. And there's no better example of our own humanity coming together than in the cleanup of a storm, right here in our communities. And that's why in this campaign, we are about talking, we are about listening, and we're about action too. We're gonna do, I think, our 11th service project this coming weekend. We call them Service Saturdays, because this can't just be about left or right. You hear all these labels coming from my opponent. This is about the ability to represent everyone here and the ability to come together, that we all rely on each other at the end of the day. And I know this because that's what life in the Army was, that's what life in the teacher was, and working in the Pentagon. You have to be able to humanize each other and work together before the stakes are so high. That's why I'm doing this in the first place, because politics as usual isn't helping anyone.
Thank you. Mr. FEEHAN, we'll continue with you. Workforce shortages are found all across this congressional district. What policies will you support to keep American workers competitive? Mr. FEEHAN.
Absolutely. My conversations with small businesses across the district for the last 15 months have been very clear. There are enormous opportunities in every community, but there are not enough qualified people to serve in those opportunities. And this has to start with my own version as a teacher. Our 5th and 6th graders, what I used to teach, they have open minds. They're open to the opportunities you place in front of them. And we have to make sure that in every one of our communities there is a partnership with the trades and the skilled building trades that allow those kids to know what they can do in their own communities. There are incredible opportunities here. You don't have to go and get a 4-year degree somewhere else and then try to come back. There's incredible opportunities right here. So you have to partner. But secondly, we have to develop our own infrastructure, because attracting people to our communities is a function of buildings and roads. It's also a function of broadband internet, affordable housing, incredible parks, incredible parts of our community that we can celebrate to attract people to come here so that we can fill those incredible jobs. Because let's not kid ourselves. Our economy is powered by people. And if we're not doing everything we can to bring people into our communities and make sure they stay strong, then our economy won't stay strong at the end of the day. And I believe in the power of human potential. That I saw that every day as a soldier and as a teacher. And that's what I want to empower here. And I don't believe that government is principally the best way to do that. It's about partnerships at the end of the day.
Thank you. Mr. Hagedorn, same question.
Well, part of the issue right now, as far as finding suitable folks for the labor force, is a good problem. The economy in many areas is booming. The construction trades especially. I was just over in Rochester talking to my friends with Weezer Brothers Construction, and they said they had enough work for about 190 people through the rest of this year. They only had 135 on staff. So I get that it's a problem. And they were laying cement that day, and they were talking about the trades and how they had to get back into the high schools and make sure that they were working at a younger age to get people interested in going that direction. I support all of those types of initiatives to make sure that we do encourage people who work with their hands to go into those professions and do it at an early age if possible. But I also support for our farmers and others that have a need to find suitable workforce, a labor program, a work program, so people can come into our country and work, and it's all verified by the government. They can build up credits towards citizenship if that would work for them, or they could come and go as they please. Now, we have to have strict border security, and we have to have merit-based immigration and all these other things. Maybe we'll talk about that later. But we should have a work program to help our farmers and others who have needed work where we can't find enough U.S. citizens to do the work.
Thank you. Mr. Fiat. I've already given you that question, haven't I? I'm getting old. Mr. Hagler, this question will be for you. Healthcare costs continue to rise and create challenges for employers and individuals. Please list 2 policy changes you support to reduce cost and expand access to healthcare. Mr. Hagler.
Well, thank you, and I hope you'll consider holding this question open for one more round, because it's very, very important and there's a lot to talk about. The first thing to get out is this. Minnesota didn't need Obamacare. Obamacare, if there's one state in the union that was hurt most by Obamacare, it was this one. We had 94% of the people covered with a system in place to handle folks with pre-existing expensive medical needs. All Obamacare came in has disrupted the insurance market, made things worse, drove up premiums. We have farmers, business people, other folks paying $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 a year for premiums with deductibles so high the underlying insurance is virtually worthless. That's a disaster. Now, what the other team wants to do right now is take us towards socialized medicine. That's not going to be good for anybody. The quality of medicine is not going to be good, it's going to go down. Innovation down. The reimbursements to our doctors and hospitals going to be cut in half. Who thinks the Mayo Clinic can continue to have their successful model in our fine hospitals if that happens? 2 quick ideas on how we drop down costs. One, we do have to have competition across state lines and things like that for insurance. But we need people shopping for their routine medical care, holding their tax-free money in accounts where they can grow, where they have incentives for healthy living, and transparency in cost. People need to know what it costs to go to the doctor before they go to the doctor, or get their MRI before they get their MRI. If we have that in place, we'll have shopping, we'll put downward pressure on costs.
Thank you, Mr. Hagler. Mr. Fiat, same question.
Look, I'm going to talk about healthcare in a second. I think it's important to think of the language that we're using here, the idea of the other team. Back to this political polarization here, the idea of other team, this way to divide each other. I want to state very clearly here, I am running to be an independent voice, because it is only with independent leadership that you are able to get things done, that you're able to work with people with very different backgrounds and diverse viewpoints. And there's no better issue to tackle that with than with healthcare. And there's no doubt right now that the status quo is not working, especially for small business owners. Especially for small business owners whose costs have only risen in the last 2 years, and who see the ability, the ones I talk to, they want to be able to provide health care to employers. But I see small business owners unable to grow, unable to open because of health care costs in the first place. Well, while the status quo is not working, we can't go backwards either. We cannot go back to a place where we put pre-existing conditions at risk, and we put people out on their own, unable to get health care in the first place. And I am someone who always likes to move forward. And you have to think about that when it comes to healthcare, because the challenges here are truly unique in rural healthcare. Because it's not just a matter of whether you have healthcare, it's how far away it is too. And when I think about the issues to be able to get there, you have to have a vision. And the vision is that everyone can get coverage here, and that burden's not on the employer to do so in the first place. But let's also talk about lowering prescription drug prices and allowing Medicare to negotiate directly with companies. Because only with an independent leader that's not beholden to special interests, especially Big Pharma, are you allowed to do that in the first place.
Thank you, Mr. Fiat. We're going to turn to the first question that we have received from our audience, and while I am reading this question, I would remind everyone as well, if you have a question that you would like to ask the candidates, please write it on the little piece of paper on your tables, and then just hold your hand up, as there are so many back here today. Brad? You're Dan, he's Brad. And he will pick them up and get them to us. Mr. FEEHAN, we'll turn to you. In relationships with our neighbors, immigration has overwhelmed the debate. Could you give us your views on President Trump's handling of the immigration question?
Absolutely. This has been, beyond healthcare, one of the top campaign topics that's come up in my conversations across the district with people. And without a doubt, there are differing perspectives and viewpoints on the issue of immigration, but there is one common thread. Our system is broken. And it's broken because Washington is broken. And it's broken because bipartisan ideas haven't been allowed to actually happen in the first place. And it's broken because what we're talking about here, again, enabling human capital, enabling people to work in the communities they live in, isn't happening right now. And when my view of immigration, I'm happy to talk about the concept of border security. But let's have a real concept. Let's have a real discussion about national security then, and the threat of cyber terrorism, bioterrorism, and all the other threats that are very much threats in our country today. And I'm happy to have that conversation. But the conversations I have in southern Minnesota are the fact that we rely on immigration for employment here. It's just the burden is on employers again to figure this out. And there's very simple ways that we can move that ball forward, whether through a guest worker program or finally solving DACA in the first place. But again, a co-equal branch of government, the U.S. Congress, is the one that starts legislation in the first place. And they should be focused on these common sense solutions to better people's lives and allow our economy to get even stronger here in southern Minnesota.
Thank you. Mr. Hagedorn.
Well, that's a clear choice on this issue. The left and the Democrats are giving you open borders. And I can prove that in sanctuary politics. Tim Walz is running for governor to say he wants to make Minnesota a sanctuary state. Dan's for open borders. You just heard him talk, didn't give you one idea of one solution that he suggests that we do as far as securing our country's borders. We need to make sure that our country's borders are secure. It's a national security issue. I support merit-based immigration. We're the most generous people in the whole world as far as bringing people into our country. We do it 1 million times every year legally. But by golly, we need to make sure that everyone's coming here, that we know who they are, that we know what they're doing, that we have some chance that they're going to assimilate and be able to fill work in our economy to contribute to our country and the citizens who are already here. This chain migration stuff doesn't work. We also have to fix this visa and passport system that allows people to fly into our country, and over 5 million of them overstay. They're here today illegally. What's going on? We need to be able to find them and remove them from our country when they overstay, just like every other country around the world. And then we do need to have a work program for people to come here and fill needed jobs. But it needs to be organized. It can't be everybody run over the border and then let's go find work and depress wages and create crime and other problems. It's a very serious issue, but it's a completely big, different divide between the two parties. They're going to want amnesty, open borders, and sanctuary politics. And I'm on the other side.
This issue again. Yes, and the next question takes a different viewpoint or a different slant at the question of international relationships, particularly regarding international trade. Would you support withdrawing from NAFTA or revising it?
Well, I support what the president's been doing as far as trying to revise NAFTA. Just had an agreement today with Canada, Mexico, and the United States that they've made some progress and headway, and they have a new agreement. One that can be revisited down the road, but one that all three countries said was going to expand trade opportunities. We have, for instance, especially in this district, the finest agricultural products in all the world. One of the responsibilities of federal officials, like I'd like to be from the president on down, is to make sure that we have open markets, global trade for our products. Right now what's been going on, as he said in the campaign, and he's been following through, China's been ripping us off. You know, when Dan was with the Obama administration as a political appointee, that was a pretty bad deal. They ran over Obama, manipulated their currency, and stole our intellectual property. They even stole 20 million records of federal officials. The Chinese are not good characters, not good actors. And so the president wants to reset this. So he's on the way. We've got to deal with Mexico and Canada. We're going to make it in the end to drop down the barriers, expand international global trade. It's going to be good for steel workers, farmers, consumers, and everyone.
Thank you. Mr. FEEHAN.
We're happy to discuss this. I do want to take a second though. There's a consistent theme emerging here, and it's a theme you've probably seen on your TV screens too. And it's this attempt to undermine my service to the country. So let me be very clear to you, sir. You have no idea what I have seen or done on behalf of the United States of America. I have done what it takes to keep this country safe and will continue to do what it takes to keep this country safe. There is nothing I view more serious than that. So how dare you attempt to make that anything other than it is. Now when we talk about this, we talk about the concept of trade, we seem to have glossed over our reality right here in front of us right now. I sat next to Mr. Hagedorn at Farm Fest back in August, and I watched him tell farmers, our farmers, to simply be patient. Now, I have a community right here in front of me. Tell me someone that accepts the idea that they should be patient with their paycheck. Without a doubt, Minnesota has an incredible economy that has a global reach. But if Congress does not have a seat at our table, seat at the table with our trade policies, then we will take the brunt of it. And that's what's happening right now. That's what's happening with this harvest. That's what's going to happen next year, because there is a trade war happening right now that apparently we're not going to talk about. That southern Minnesota is, again, expected to be the ones that are being patient right now. I don't accept that. And an independent voice has to be in Washington, D.C. to make sure we are at the table when those decisions are made in the first place.
Thank you. Mr. FEEHAN, to you again. Do you support major federal investment in infrastructure? If so, how would you fund such an investment? Mr. FEEHAN.
Absolutely. We've talked about infrastructure a little bit today, but it is what enables economic growth in our country. And yes, it's things like Highway 14 and how it still has miles to go, but it's beyond that. It's our bridges, it's broadband infrastructure, it's affordable housing. They are the things that make our communities strong and enable people to come in to be a part of them. And yes, there's a function of funding this too, but I'm someone, as a matter of philosophy, as someone who's been a steward of the treasure of the United States, as from my work in the Pentagon, I want to make sure we are spending the money we're already spending wisely. And there's a topic I like to bring up every time. We've been at war as a nation for 17 straight years. 17 straight years, Americans have died on foreign soil on behalf of global war on terror. If we ended the global war on terror today, the cost would be $5 trillion. And so if we want to talk about spending, I want to talk about what we're spending money on right now. And again, Congress has to be one at the table to make that call of whether it's worth still sending southern Minnesotan men and women overseas on behalf of the United States.
Thank you. Mr. Hagedorn.
I do support infrastructure as best as possible at the federal level. My philosophy has always been try to take the money and authority and send it back to the states so it can get into areas like this where you have legislators and a governor that can make informed choices. I would always stress roads and bridges over some of these real projects that I don't think really have too much bang for the buck. But I say this, Dan, you know, I do honor your service. I was serious when I said that. But, you know, it's not wrong of me to point out that you were a political appointee for Barack Obama. Barack Obama did not hire too many independent voices in his administration, I can assure you. They tended to be very liberal voices. And that's okay. But I think, I'm just, be honest about it as far as your background with Barack. That's not a problem. But, your service in the military, your service in other places, I don't believe whatever it is you learned there has led to what I would say would be informed decisions to represent the people of southern Minnesota. Your positions on the issues are far left. They don't fit the district. The open borders, the gun control, and these things. And maybe part of that's because, you're not from the district. You came out here after walls quit and you moved in, and that's fine. It's, it's a free country. But I'd like to think that perhaps my views and values reflect the district because maybe I've spent more time here and, I have local connections. But it's just a disagreement, and it doesn't mean I'm demeaning your service.
Thank you, Mr. Hagedorn. Mr. Hagedorn, we'll turn to you, and we're going to turn to some audience questions here, so please bear with me as I'm looking at many of these for the first time. Mr. Hagedorn, someone from the audience has written, I have lost access to foreign markets due to the tariffs. What can you do to open up access for my soy crops?
Well, again, I'm not a fan of tariffs. I mean, Wall Street Journal and I probably take kind of the same position. I think, in general, tariffs are good for the governments that impose them and for the industries that they try to protect. And it usually is for a temporary period, and it has diminishing returns. But, you know, the Farm Bureau endorsed me in this race for a reason. They know that I'm someone who comes from a farm background and going to work very hard. My intention and goal is to serve on the Agriculture Committee, to be a voice and be in a position in order to get things done, to have direct ties into the administration and others to make that happen. What the president's been trying to do with China and others to reset these things is to have better trade moving forward for a long, long time. And the farmers that I speak with in the district, and they're about 19 out of 20, I tell you, it's the truth. And they all said, look, we know it's going to be rough. We're not excited about this. However, it has to be done. We can't allow China to continue to pound us as they have year after year after year. And we finally have a president who's standing up to them and wants to make change. And I think so far, you know, the question is, TPP, I supported that. That was President Obama's initiative. I would have voted for that. You know, did Dan support TPP? Did he support, is he going to support this new NAFTA agreement? Is he for free trade or for fair trade? There's two different things there. So those are just questions that I think should be answered, and be honest with folks about where we're coming from.
Thank you. Mr. FEEHAN.
Absolutely. This is a common question that I've been hearing from farmers, especially small farmers, right now. And I'm trying to imagine, we're in day one, by the way, without a farm bill right now. That adds to the complexity here. That adds to the disaster that's playing out in southern Minnesotan farms right now. Because say this trade war goes on another year, 2 more years, 3 more years. How long are we expecting our economy to be patient on this front? And the markets, let's talk about these markets for a second. These markets weren't opened by the government. These markets were opened on the shoulders of our farmers, who spent generations to make sure that those foreign markets gained access to our crops. It was on them. So I cannot understand why we're in a place where we accept a government intervention to take those markets away, because that's the place we're in right now. And again, if Congress is not at the table to represent the interests of what happens in southern Minnesota with trade policy made this recklessly, then it will only continue. And we're again expected to be Minnesota nice about this the whole time. I do not accept that. I do not accept the status quo with this. I do not accept that we have to be the ones to be patient here. And if we want to talk about the threats facing our country right now, I will tell you how we can confront those in the best way I know how. And this isn't working for us right now. Every farmer I talk to expresses the same, and that's why I'm honored to have the support of both the cattlemen and the farmers union at the same time, because those voices are ones that I'm going to represent as an independent voice in Washington.
Thank you. Mr. FEEHAN, we're going to return to the question about immigration from 2 questions presented by our audience members. The first question, what is your position on immigration reform? Should we build a wall on our southern border? And do you support making Minnesota a sanctuary state? And the second question, with low unemployment ratios, how do businesses continue to function with the removal of undocumented people? Mr. FEEHAN.
Great, I'm glad these questions are coming up, because this represents the conversations we've been having across the campaign right now. Without a doubt, again, inaction right now puts the burden on communities, puts the burden on employers, and it puts the burden on law enforcement too. Law enforcement I've talked to throughout the district just wants to know what the system is supposed to be doing for us right now. And right now we have both mayors and law enforcement making decisions in our immigration policy. I do not accept that. To that first question, I don't accept that. It is Washington's responsibility to make this system work, and that's how we have to do it without putting the burden on those employers, without putting the burden on our law enforcement, who's trying to figure it out on their own right now. So no, I don't accept that. And the concept of a border wall, happy to talk about that. I want to keep this country safe, because as I've stated very clearly, that has been the business of most of my adult life. It's taken me to some pretty unpleasant places along the way. But if you make policy by simply saying there's only one way to do something, you will tend to fail. If you want to keep the border safe, then we should have that conversation, because it is an advent of technology more than anything, an advent of people that is going to do the work to make sure every border of ours is safe and secure, not just from material threats, but again from threats like cyberspace at the same time. And you need someone who's able to understand these concepts immediately. So we're doing everything we can to keep ourselves safe. At the end of the day, our communities are strongest when everyone that's a part of them is allowed to thrive as part of our economy, and we have no fear of what's coming from anywhere else. That is what I've spent my lifetime doing and intend to do as well in Congress.
Thank you, sir. Mr.
Well, again, I think you heard it. He talked a lot, but he didn't say anything. Does he support Walz's position to make Minnesota a sanctuary state? Kind of sounded like it, but he didn't say yes or no. Does he support the border wall? Well, I can tell you this, we need to build a wall, we need to have a fence, we need to have barriers, we need to do whatever we have to do in order to protect this country from people coming in from other nations. And we need to make sure that in the end, we support the agents of Immigration and Customs Enforcement to do their jobs. We have too many people in our nation that need to be deported, and they need to go do their jobs, and we need to support them. And my question for my friend again would be, does he want to abolish ICE like the rest of the Democrat Party out there? Under what circumstances should they be allowed to do their jobs and deport illegal aliens? And this idea of having a sanctuary state, let me tell you what that means. That means every illegal alien in about a 10-state region is going to come right here to Minnesota, because and it's going to drive up our crime, it's going to drive up our cost of government. It is not going to make us safe. It is a policy that needs to be just stopped in its tracks, and everybody needs to know exactly how important this election is, because we cannot have that happen to the state of Minnesota, and we don't need a sanctuary country either. Let's cooperate with our federal officials. Let's enforce the rule of law. Let's defend this country in that regard.
Thank you, Mr. Hagedorn. A question that has come from our audience. Mr. Hagedorn, we'll begin with you. What are your feelings toward the EPA?
Probably the same as my friend Cullen Peterson up there, a Democrat, who I remember him at Farm Fest saying that these extremists in the Obama EPA are going to destroy agriculture. And this brings us back to another thing. Everybody wants to talk about the trade war, which is a temporary thing, and the president's going to work that out. He's doing it already. Before there was a trade war, so-called trade war, there was a war against agriculture by the Obama administration that had a bullseye on southern Minnesota farmers and others in our rural communities. These extremist regulations coming out of EPA, like Waters of the United States, that is a disaster that gives federal officials, the federal government, way too much power over your land. We can never allow that to happen, where people are going to have to go petition the government to get the use of their land back and spend all sorts of money doing it. And just the opposite, what we need to do is take the power from the EPA, send it back to Congress. I support something called the REINS Act. It'd be a good question for Dan, does he support it? And that means that the House and the Senate have to affirm major regulations before they go live and affect people like farmers. That's only common sense. That returns and restores the power of government from the unelected bureaucrats to the Congress, your representatives, the people that write the laws. The law should be administered as the Congress sees fit, not the EPA extremists.
Thank you. Mr. FEEHAN.
My viewpoint on regulations. Regulations happen when Congress isn't doing its job. Both Democrats and Republicans, it happens. And it's when Congress is far more interested in doing the legislative side of things than making sure the executive agencies are actually doing their job within the letter of the law. That's how I approach them. That's my concept moving forward. And so when I'm thinking about the EPA, I'm thinking about the EPA that either one of us is expected to deal with right now. An EPA that is granting waivers so that our biofuel industry is just put under a press right now and can barely get out from underneath it. And again, this is a matter of law. The renewable fuel standard is the matter of the law here that we're talking about. But again, it's an EPA that seems to be suddenly no more problem with my opponent, that we can take again and take our economy right now when it's feeling the pressure of a trade war that has no end in sight, and expect them to figure it out along the way with an economy that we rely on all up and down Highway 14 and throughout southern Minnesota.
Thank you, sir. Another question for you, Mr. FEEHAN. This comes from our audience as well. Washington is overrun by hyper-partisanship and too many members that are subservient to big campaign contributors of all stripes. For each candidate, if elected, who will you support for leadership of your caucus? And two, Mr. FEEHAN, if the Democrats are in the majority, will you support the Hassert Rule? Mr. Hagedorn, do you support the Hassert Rule? Mr. FEEHAN, we'll begin with you.
I am running for Congress because I believe a new generation of leadership is needed in Washington. I'm a millennial that carries student loan debt. There aren't a lot of those in Congress today. And I believe the party leadership on both sides of the aisle has been there far too long. That is my belief. That's why I'm doing it. That's why I took a pledge to not accept corporate PAC money, because I watched both Democrats and Republicans take it and change their votes at the will of corporations. And that's why I have not committed anything to anyone I would support. Because if I'm lucky enough to get elected, anyone who's running to be a leader in our House of Representatives is going to need to pass my test that they have the interests of Southern Minnesotans at heart. That's the idea. We are running very simply. We're running to take an oath of office to support and defend the Constitution. It's not to any party leader. I certainly haven't made a pledge to any party leader. My opponent seems to think differently about that, about what his job is there. Again, Congress being a co-equal branch of government, independent of the executive. That's how I view the idea. So when we talk about this, I imagine my opponent in a second is going to say something completely different. Again, talking about sides and partisanship. He is embracing the idea that hyper-partisanship is what works in Washington. That's why we're here in the first place.
Thank you. Mr. Hagedorn.
Well, I think the difference is I'm taking positions on the issues and letting people know what I stand for, and Dan isn't. And so that if you call that partisan and all, whatever, I have positions, I have views. You know, I tell people what I want to do with the job, and that's what we're going to do. As far as who we would support for leadership, look, there's a big difference between the two of us. I'll support a Republican. I'm going to vote for a Republican to be Speaker of the House so we can continue to partner with President Trump and keep moving our country in the right direction. He's going to support a Democrat, probably Pelosi, who's put money into this campaign to support it. That's the way it goes. All right? And there's nothing wrong with that. We should be partisan in the sense that, you know, our names are on the ballot and they're under two different parties. We stand for many different things. There's nothing wrong with that. So as far as this money thing is concerned, look, I think it's this. I'm never going to trade my vote for money. I'm never going to trade my philosophy for money. The issues that I run on as far as national security issues, securing the border, all this government reform, we've only talked about a little bit of it, protecting our basic rights, agriculture, those have been my positions my whole life. Nobody's going to change them. And because they give me a contribution, you know what happens? They give me a contribution because they think we're going to help the Republicans stay in power, and we're going to do what the people want here in southern Minnesota. And, you know, the majority of his money comes from outside of Minnesota. The majority of my money comes from inside of Minnesota. A little bit of a difference.
Thank you, Mr. Hagedorn. Mr. Hagedorn, we'll continue with you. Also from our audience, rural schools and healthcare centers are closing. What can you do to support funds for rural communities? What can you do in Washington to protect the rural communities of Minnesota?
The best thing we can do for our rural communities is to make sure that we have a very strong agriculture economy. You know, I live in Blue Earth. It's a rural community. I grew up in Truman on a farm. And those, you know, things have changed over the last few decades as far as how many people are on the farms and working and so forth. And so the cities have changed. But what happens in agriculture when somebody has to sell out because of bad government policies is it puts enormous pressure on our rural communities. It means there's going to be selling out to larger operators. Larger operators are not bad people, but it means fewer people holding the land, fewer people working the land, fewer people living in our rural communities, fewer people going to our schools, and on it goes. We spent much of the last year going in under the radar, not doing it in a campaign mode, talking with mayors like Tom, talking with local people in the economic development area, county administrators, sheriffs, and others, to try to find out what's going on the ground, how best we could help if and when we were elected to Congress. And I can just tell you that it's a, you know, it's a shared deal. Everybody's got to participate, but it all starts with our rural economy. And if you want to be on the agriculture like I do, there are three facets to helping farmers: lower input costs, keep farmers going in times when it's tough with things like the Farm Bill, and make sure we have expanded markets for our farmers. And if we do those types of things and lower the burdens of government, regulations, taxes, Obamacare, which is a disaster for farmers, and energy,
Thank you,
we
sir.
can help.
Thank you, sir. Mr. FEEHAN.
Absolutely. This has been a trend of the whole campaign. How do we re-envision our rural communities going into the future so they can stay strong both with people and the best quality of life possible? And at the core of that is education and healthcare. I was just in Blue Earth last week, and you see this dynamic playing out, where there is an attempt to influence and try to get entrepreneurship into the community, which ties to the hospital, and the idea that the hospital needs to attract good doctors, and doctors need to know that their quality of life is going to be high at the same time. And this ties into education, where we have very much a teacher shortage in southern Minnesota right now, because of things like student loan debt and the idea that we allow our teachers to just be crushed by it in the first place. So they can't make enough and they can't pay their bills and they can't stay teachers. And that is the core of education in the first place, making sure teachers are able to stay teachers and get better and better and better. And when it comes to healthcare and a broader topic of politics, Representative Walz has introduced a bill, the Small Towns Regional and Vitality Act. And this is my own viewpoint on it as well. We should be going directly to the communities to talk to them about how and where to invest directly there. Washington, D.C. has a blanket approach to just say, well, it'll figure it out on its own. That doesn't work. We need to go directly to local leaders to say where investments in healthcare, education, entrepreneurship, and beyond need to be made, and what better people to turn to than the leaders themselves.
Thank you. Mr. FEEHAN, the next question is for you to begin with. It is from our audience, but I'm going to expand it just a little bit. The question is, what is your stance on medical marijuana? And let's take it a little broader. What is your stance on the legalization of marijuana in general?
Happy to speak to this both as a former teacher and as a veteran, two ways in which this is absolutely an issue. It's the idea of medical marijuana. Right now, the Department of Veterans Affairs isn't even allowed to study this or research it because of the current administration. Men and women that I have served with have been diagnosed with all sorts of things coming out of the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. And by and large, they are given and prescribed medicine over and over. Medicine which can turn to addiction and go down a very negative road. This is absolutely an area that should be looked at immediately, because I am in support of research that leads to the expansion of medical marijuana. And let's talk more broadly about this as a concept in the first place. Our criminal justice system, because of nonviolent drug offenses, is just encumbered right now. And this is a perfect area to talk about where and how marijuana can be regulated and taxed to a place where it can be a part of our economies without becoming the burden that it is right now on our criminal justice system, our mental health system, and everything beyond.
Thank you. Mr. Hagedorn.
I oppose the legalization of marijuana for a pretty simple reason. One of these people when I was growing up, I was taught that just say no. Nothing really good comes from doing illegal drugs. But as we've been crisscrossing the district, talking with sheriffs and chiefs of police, they'll tell you that the marijuana of today is a lot stronger than the marijuana of 30, 40 years ago or whatever, and that it is a gateway, and that people use it, and they either have to stop using it so they can get back to that high or whatever, or they move on to something else, and it's creating a lot of problems. And I don't think it's in the best interest of the people at this point, certainly to legalize. I'll give you a straight answer. I'm not sure he did, but the other thing about that is that I think just in general, there's a lot of pressure being placed on our law enforcement officers. There are fine people out there trying to do their work. Drugs are really destroying families. Drugs are destroying lots of communities, putting pressure on them. You add in mental illness and other types of things. That's like 75% of their work. Every day, police officers go out to work. They don't even know what they're going to see. It's just crazy, and I think this would only add to the problem. We can probably study what's been going on in places like Washington State, Colorado. From my perspective, I don't think it's been a benefit.
Thank you. Mr. Hagedorn, what is your view on abortion?
I'm pro-life, 100% pro-life. I believe that from conception to natural death, that it's the government's responsibility to protect those who are most vulnerable. Innocent, unborn babies, the elderly, the disabled, and people with special needs. That's my position. If you're looking for an area on life, and I've been endorsed by the Minnesota Citizens Concern for Life, the MCCL, and others, that the situation's been out there now for 40-some years. Roe versus Wade had millions and millions of potential human beings destroyed. Right now, we're running around trying to find workers. There's a lot of workers, unfortunately, that aren't with us, who would have been with us otherwise. But I think we should be at least able to agree to this, that when a baby is in a mother's womb and hits 20 weeks, a point where the medical community says it feels pain, can we at least agree not to have abortions from that point forward, except to save the life of the mother? Rape or incest, can we just agree to that? The Republicans have brought that bill up several times in the U.S. House. 98.5% of the Democrats opposed it, voted against it. That's extreme. Even the European socialists think that that's extreme. And I think we need to stand up and defend and protect life. And I'd be interested to know if my opponent here, if he supports or opposes that bill.
Thank you. Mr. FEEHAN.
I believe in women's health care, and I believe in a women's right to choose and determine their own health care. That is how I believe. Now look, at the concept of this, I want to reduce abortions, and I want to protect the life that is out there in the world today. And the way that you can do that is by investing in education, investing in our kids so that they understand how to interact with each other. And what you will see from that are incredible gains of just anti-bullying that comes from it, a reduction in abortions, and in taking care of the children that are already there. And I think about the kids that I taught in Gary, Indiana. Very tough zip code to come from. And how much we, right now, neglect communities like that and leave them behind. How much right now we neglect and leave communities behind in our own communities right here. And that investment has to be our priority going forward. But beyond this, the concept of life. I've protected this country in a couple of different ways. That is what I think about when I think about protecting life. That is what I think about when I think about protecting this country. But again, at the end of the day, freedom is what I was fighting for in the first place, and I am fighting for right now a woman's right to choose.
Thank you. Mr. FEEHAN, we'll start the last question with you, and then we'll turn, after our questions, we will turn to the closing statement. But Mr. FEEHAN, last question to begin with you. What have you done over the past year that has prepared you for this position? Mr. FEEHAN.
Work my tail off. Look, this is something of mutual respect. This is a hard thing to do, and you realize from day one that you're on a roller coaster. You're going to be up, you're going to be down, but you got to be humble every single day because tomorrow's going to happen and tomorrow's going to happen. This is the preparation for the job. This is what we're signing up for. We're signing up for the idea to be yelled at, to be disagreed with, and told we're worthless along the way. That's okay. That's what public service is. That's what we're knowingly doing here. And so the past year has been humbling, and that is the best preparation you can have, because this is what the stakes are at the end of the day. Washington, D.C. is broken right now because it's a place of inaction. One side just argues with the other, one side just says that side is wrong, and they go home and they clap their hands like they did a good job. Inaction is what leads to bad policy. Inaction leads to no policy and no progress. And again, the idea that taking a pledge to not accept corporate PAC money allows me to be an independent voice if I'm lucky enough to have the chance to represent Southern Minnesota.
Thank you. Mr. Hagedorn.
Well, we've always tried to conduct our campaigns in a very straightforward way to make it as personal with 600,000+ people as we could. And that's why, from the beginning of this, we ran retail campaigning. We did it the old-fashioned way. Walked into communities and went door to door with business leaders, walked door to door in neighborhoods, went to 103 of the possible 105 county fairs these last 5 years, and we walked every last parade and then up to the community festival to shake hands personally with about 250,000 people. And then we offered you up our views on the issues in a straightforward way so you can make an informed choice as to whether or not you think I would reflect your views and values and I would be a good representative for you. It's a joy. We just did this parade at Mankato the other day, and to get out there and see people in their communities is wonderful. We've literally walked 350 miles of parades on this campaign. That's like starting in South Dakota on I-90, crisscrossing I-90 all the way, shaking hands to Wisconsin, and turning around going back to Rochester. So it's the personal connections, it's standing up and giving you a straightforward position on the issue. And then I think it's also getting in and talking with the thought leaders in the communities these last year, doing it in a non-campaign way. Just under the radar, talking with folks, trying to find out what's going on the ground so we could be as helpful as possible if and when we win.
Thank you. Thank you in the audience for supplying some questions. If we did not get to your question, I do apologize. We just simply ran out of time. Thank you. They were very well-written questions, and we appreciated your supplying them to us. We will now turn to our opportunity to give the gentlemen 2 minutes each for their closing statement. And Mr. FEEHAN, we'll begin with you. Yeah.
Thank you. It's a Monday. You've got busy lives and you took the time out of your day to be here in the first place. It speaks about you, it speaks about your patriotism, your love for your country, and your ability to have a civil dialogue about where we need to go as a country as well. I'm honored to be here. The honor of this campaign is one that, yes, humbles you, but boy, it empowers you too, because you realize how much bigger it is than one person. And it's bigger than the two of us too. There are very real challenges, and we only scratched the surface of them today, about what's impacting people here. And it's not just what's impacting today, but it's envisioning a future, because challenges have a way of growing. And if you don't confront them, that's what happens. And I'm running to confront challenges. When I tried to figure out how to stop and find roadside bombs, we had a big challenge on our hands. But I looked around at a platoon full of soldiers more diverse than the country itself. We couldn't agree on what energy drink was best, what cigarette was best, but that didn't matter. We still got things done. And I did it while under a very simple oath. That oath was to support and defend the Constitution. And it just so happens that the oath I took as an Army officer is the same oath you take as a member of Congress. You don't take an oath to any party leadership, to any corporation, to being mean to the other side and being satisfied with going home and being happy that you made your point. You do it because people are relying on you. That's what I've learned throughout my life, the responsibility of leadership. It's as humbling as it is empowering, and I'd be honored for the chance to represent you in a different way of service and represent the values of the place that grew me, Southern Minnesota. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Haggard.
It's a pleasure to be with you today. Thanks for the opportunity. I just put it to you straight. America's future is on the ballot. In this election, you're going to have a choice between two fundamentally different perspectives on how we should move forward. The resistance, the impeachment of Donald Trump, taking us to the left with things like socialized medicine. You know, this is the first election in our history where socialized medicine, government control of the Mayo Clinic and our fine rural hospitals and all that that means, first election in our history that's on the ballot. When people really believed that there were enough people in the Democrat Party that would do that if they were held power. And that would destroy our economy in southern Minnesota, it would destroy medicine as we know it, and it would undermine all the progress that's going on in places like Rochester and other places in southern Minnesota. It's a very critical deal. That's just one of the choices. I tell you again, I'm running for Congress to be a conservative reinforcement in the U.S. House, to partner with President Trump and like-minded colleagues to keep moving our country in the right direction, to keep making sure that we have a safe and secure America with the strongest military on earth and secure borders, to make sure that we reform our government to keep America prosperous with high-wage jobs, regulatory reform, more tax reform, welfare reform. I'm all for work for welfare. I believe strongly in that. Getting rid of this Obamacare with free market principles. U.S. energy independence. Those are big ideas and solutions that will move us forward. Protect our God-given rights and sustain agriculture in our rural way of life. I ask for your vote humbly, and with the opportunity, I would work hard for you each and every day. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Can we give one last round of applause for our He wasn't sure.
We want to thank you all again for coming today. Thank you to the candidates. Terrific to have you here today, and we appreciate your thoughtful answers. We will be hosting state representative forums in a week here at the same place, so please join us for that, and have a great day. Thanks, everybody.